Let us open in prayer. The Lord be with you. Father, we give you thanks that you intend that we do know you and your heart. We give you thanks that in Jesus you have revealed yourself and in him you have rescued us. We ask that throughout this year you would continue to open through your word who you are and what you have done to bring about our rescue and new life in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. I made this suggestion last week, but I'll make it again more firmly this week because of a couple conversations I had afterward. If you had any problem with the reading, my strong suggestion to you is on your phone, assuming you have a smartphone, get the Bible app so that you can listen to the text. I may or may not have said this last Wednesday, but the scriptures were listened to long before they were read with eyes individually, and it is a helpful thing to hear. So when you're driving, when you're working, to listen to the text is a pretty helpful way, especially if you're finding that your attention wanders or that it's too much for you to read in a sitting. Listening to the text is a great way to do it. Anybody have any issues either with figuring out what you were supposed to read or finding it or any such thing? All right. So we're getting to a question. The fancy word we use for it is theodicy. And theodicy means talking about God and what God's like. And how do you know what God is like? The thing that I handed you here, as I suggested to you, is absolute garbage. And let's talk about why it's absolute garbage. I'll give you a parallel before we get there. I heard a story. I thought it was from Trapp, but Trapp said it's not from Trapp. It's from somebody else. Pastor had family in the congregation who had not been attending, who had been absent from worship, and they had a small child. The small child wandered back out in their property to whatever body of water was back there, whether a pond or a stream or whatnot, and drowned. The pastor heard as he was walking through the narthex that following Sunday, somebody say, well, I guess that was God giving her a wake-up call. About the mom. That is the equivalent of what's going on here when people will see a disaster and assume that what that disaster must mean is that God is bringing some manner of judgment. My favorite story about this comes right from Minnesota, and comes right from Minnesota about, 15 years ago? Maybe not even that. But the ELCA was having a convention in Minneapolis, and they were talking about the sexuality statement. And while they were talking about it, a bolt of lightning hit the church. And the people on the one side said, this is God bringing judgment because we've been so slow to bring homosexuals in. And the other said, this is God bringing judgment because we're considering bringing homosexuals in. Both sides decided that God was giving a sign to them. And when you have both sides who are saying this is what God's up to and they're just the opposite, you can tell you're in a bad place when you're trying to figure out what God is doing on the basis of what you see. The darker part comes when you get the cancer. And then you decide that this must be God getting you back for what you did 20 years ago. Or this must be God saying, I'm not happy with you and here's my judgment upon you. And so as we're asking the question, how do we know? How do we know what God is and what God is doing? That's going to bring us into the book of Job. That is all about this question of what's going on with God and what's God doing. So let's get into the text. For those of you who did the Bible nerd thing and read the whole thing, we're not doing a thorough investigation of Job today. At some point I would do a Job Bible study, but we're just going to kind of do an overview because our primary thing that we're asking today is, How do you know who God is and what God's all about? And the first thing I want you to do is to turn in your Bible to the place where you can see the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3. And I want you to look at, but don't read. Just look at the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3. What do you notice about the difference between the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3 without reading any of the words?
It seems to be a song after chapter 3, and it's just writing.
That's exactly right. All right. So chapters 1 and 2 and 42 are mostly what we call prose. It's just general writing. If you're reading a novel, if you're reading a newspaper account, any of that is what we call prose. Chapters 3 through 41 are poetry. It's one long poem or song that has a bunch of different verses to it. If you've been to Chanhassen, to the dinner theater, and watched a musical, or if you've been to any of the theaters in Minneapolis and seen a musical before, the whole Old Testament has a whole lot of musicals in it. There's dialogue or storytelling and narration, and then all of a sudden you get a song put in. And that's really, in some ways, a pretty helpful way for the reader to take it in. Because I'll bet there are some of you who know some songs word for word. In fact, I'll bet you know more songs word for word than you know speeches word for word. Our brains learn music pretty well. And so a lot of the music and poetry that's in the scriptures is meant to be listened to over and over and over and learned and taken in. That's true of the Psalms. That's true of a lot of the writings in the prophets. The other advantage to poetry, if you're reading it in the Hebrew, is that there's a lot of word plays that are going on. And we do this in English songs as well. Think about something, "Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. Remember to let her into your heart, then you can start to make it better." Heart and start, let her better, right? All of those sort of things that are going on, your brain takes those words in a way that's doing interesting things for you as you're hearing the song. The same thing's happening in Hebrew poetry. When it gets translated into English, we lose that. And so it doesn't look to you as if it's got interesting things going on because the interesting things were in the Hebrew and not in English. Does that make sense? Okay? But when you're reading Job 3 through 41, it's a long poem. It's a little like reading Shakespeare. And in fact, what's almost certainly true is that Job, as it exists in chapters 3 through 41, existed before Job 1, 2, and 42 were written. And the author takes 1, 2, and 42 and puts a frame around this poem, and the Spirit is going to use that to teach us something very profound about what's going on in the book of Job. And so let's go back to the beginning and start the frame story so then we can get into the heart of that poem and see what's going on there. So we hear that there's a guy named Job. And Job is considered by God to be, if you're taking notes, this is a word you want to know. We're going to come back to this word again and again and again. It's an important Bible word. Job is righteous. The word righteous means that you have God's yes, God's approval, God's thumbs up. God is saying, that's what I want. The story is not suggesting that Job never sinned. It's not suggesting that he never made mistakes. In fact, Job is going to tell you later, sure, I sinned. But Job is going to say, the problem is my sins don't match what's happening to me, right? Do you know the phrase, the punishment fits the crime, or let the punishment fit the crime? Job is going to say, I've sinned before, but what I'm experiencing here is not the punishment fitting the crime. The text tells you right off the bat that Job is righteous. And that's really important because we're about to get to a triangle, and that word righteous is going to be important as we think about the points on the triangle. So the text tells you that Job is righteous. Then you get a glimpse into the heavens, into where the spiritual beings are. And what we're going to see first is a place where translation leads us astray in understanding some key concepts. Look, if you would, with me at verse 6. We're in chapter 1 of Job. Chapter 1, verse 6 is going to screw up two things. One day, the angels, the word angel means messenger, so it's talking about the spiritual messengers that are working on behalf of Yahweh, we'll get to that in a minute, came to present themselves before who? The Lord. Now, this is not a title, even though it gets translated as a title. It's not a title, instead it's a name. Anytime you see capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that is not the word Lord. You may say to yourself, Pastor, I've been reading since I was little and I know L-O-R-D is the word Lord, but it's really not here. The fancy word for what this is the tetragrammaton, which just means it's 4 letters. But the particular 4 letters are important. In Hebrew, it's and we don't know how to pronounce it. This is the name of God. It's not a title, it's a name, which is a bigger deal than you might imagine, because I'd like you to think about the difference it means when someone is called by name and how you think about them. If I were to say to you, the chair of the Board of Elders is going to be present here today, that would be one thing. If I were to say to you, Carl's going to be here today, that feels different, right? Now, it's the same. The chair of the Board of Elders is a title. Carl's the guy. But there's so much more in a name. There's so much more of a sense of access. There's so much more of a sense of connection. And God intentionally says, I'm giving you my name. And his name shows up on almost every page in the Old Testament. You almost can't turn to a page in the Old Testament and not see capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, which is the name of God. We don't know how to pronounce it, and the reason that we don't know how to pronounce it is because people wanted to be pious, and being pious is almost always a bad idea. What happens is the people of Israel, people of Judah, are going to go into exile. They've been rotten and bad, and God says, you know what? You're not going to trust in me. I'm done protecting you. And the Babylonian army will come in and take them away into exile. And then they're going to start reflecting on all of the years where they were screwing up. And when they come back, they say, we're not going to do that again. And what they're going to do is to make it so not only will they not make mistakes, but they're not going to come close to making mistakes because they don't want to experience again what they experienced in the exile. One of the Decalogue, if you were here on Sunday, we talked about the 10 words or the Decalogue. One of the words in the Decalogue is, you will not misuse the name of your God. And the people say, great, that's the word. We're not going to come near breaking that. So to make sure we don't misuse the name of God, we're just not going to use it. We just won't speak it anymore. Right? If saying Carl in the wrong way is going to get us in trouble, we'll always refer to him as the head of the Board of Elders, and then we don't have to worry about it. Now, this is problematic because God gave his name for a reason. He wanted people to have a sense of closeness and access. In the ancient world especially, when you know someone's name, it's like you have a hold or a power over them. In CB, right? Your name that people call you by, they call it your handle. Right? And the same thing is true here. God gives his name because he says, I want you to have a handle on me. The people say we're afraid of misusing it. So every time the name comes up, we're going to substitute the Hebrew word Adonai, which is Lord. Today, in most Jewish synagogues, they'll instead substitute with the name. Right? They come to it and they say, the name said to Moses, or the name said to Isaiah. But it's the same thing. They don't want to use the name, and it's out of respect. And I respect, but you can take respect too far. If one of you came up to me and said, Daddy, are you going to preach on Sunday? That would be weird. Now, if my son came to me and said, Dad, are you going to preach on Sunday? That would not be weird at all. He and I have a different relationship with one another. But if he came to me and said, Pastor, are you going to preach on Sunday? I would give him the side eye. Because we don't have that kind of relationship. We've got an intimate relationship. He gets to call me Dad. You don't get to call me Dad. He gets to call me Dad. We're doing the same thing when we are given the intimacy of this name and we turn it into a title instead. And all of your English translations, because they want to respect the history of this, are going to substitute the name with something. My favorite substitution, the one that actually does it the best, is a newer translation called The Voice. And it refers to him as the Eternal One. And what they're doing, instead of giving a title, is to tell you what the name means. Because our best guess is Yahweh. We're not positive about that, but that's the best guess about how to say it. The word Yahweh means something like, I am who I am, or I am who I was who I will be, or I will be who I was who I am. It's suggesting that God is eternal, and this is a word you should come to know. Eternal means everywhen. You guys know the word everywhere, right? Eternal does not mean forever. Eternal means outside of time. To say that God doesn't work within time. Time is something that's part of the creation, just like dirt or bodies or breath. Time is not part of what Yahweh experiences. He's beyond time. And so the name that he gives is saying, I'm the one who was and is, who will be. I'm the one who's bigger than the time that you live in. That's what he's cueing them when he gives that name to them, that they're supposed to refer to him as the I am. Now, that's going to be important when we get to the Gospel of John, because Jesus is going to give us hints to who he is by using the words I am all the time, which is a direct reference to the name of God. But when you see the Lord, capital O, capital O, capital R, capital D, it's got to be capitalized, because if it's lowercase L-O-R-D or capital L and then lowercase O-R-D, then it is actually the word Lord. It actually is the title. But when you see this, I would encourage you in your own brain, start substituting a name. You can call him Steve or Joe, or you can call him Yahweh, but start thinking about this as a personal name, because the author is cueing you to think of this God as a personal name, not as a distant sort of God who's far away, but the one who has come close. Right? The name is doing just the opposite of keeping you at arm's length. It's inviting you in. You follow this so far? Any questions about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I even lost some of it, but then why don't we just call him Adonai?
Because we don't want to call him Lord. Adonai is Lord.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
so is Yahweh.
No. Yahweh means I am who I am. Yahweh is his name. The Lord is a substitute. So again, Lord is head of the board of elders. Carl is Yahweh, right? The name is what shows up in the text. And when they put in head of the board of elders, they're putting in an English substitute for the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is not Lord. The Hebrew word is not Adonai. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
Okay, I missed
Yep. So I'm sure that's because I wasn't clear enough about that. But when you're reading the actual text, it doesn't say Lord, right? You wouldn't see Adonai in there. The Jewish people speak that word out loud out of respect, and they don't anymore. They say the name, but they would speak that out loud out of respect. But that's not what's in the actual Bible. Your translation here is misleading you, but it's something that English translations have agreed to do for a very long time. It's a good question. Any other follow-up here? Now, later in the verse, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I always feel bad for saying this, but okay. I'm not a pastor. So does the word L-O-R-D show up in the gospel?
So it won't be capitalized when it does, and so we don't always know when it's referring to something like sir. Sometimes people will use the word Lord when what they mean is sir, and sometimes it's a reference to Adonai and therefore Yahweh.
What I'm asking is, okay, so Christ came.
Yes.
And now we're able to have a personal relationship.
Yes.
And so why isn't it like, book number 1, you can now call him because this is your, like that connection.
Yeah.
He has permission to go.
Hey, so amen. You've hit on something really important. When people stopped using the name, God said, okay, I'll give you another one. And that's Jesus. That's God saying, instead of my name being connected to my eternal nature, it's going to be connected to the most important thing I do, which is saving people. Because Jesus, Yeshua, means God saves. He says, instead of knowing me as the eternal one, the I am who I am, you're going to know me as the rescuer. You're going to know, that's how I want you to be known to me. And you're absolutely right. When we see there is no name under heaven under which people can be saved, they're doing a wordplay there. There's no name under heaven under which people can be rescued but rescuer. Right? That's the name. So you're absolutely right that Jesus is God part 2, saying I'm going to give you a name you can know. But not only that, I'm going to give you flesh you can know. So this is God saying, you want to keep me at arm's length, I won't let you. I will come to be among you. Yeah.
I've seen where people write God.
G/D.
Or asterisk D,
Yeah.
G asterisk D, or
Yep.
dash D, or
Right.
something.
Yep.
And, I maybe I can understand the Jewish people that do that, but, a lot of people do it, and I don't know why they do it. It's like, why did you do that?
They probably don't know why they do it.
It was just a good idea. Maybe they're thinking, oh, I can't write
Yeah,
rid of...
it's too holy. And really, I think this is an important lesson. Anytime that something tells you it's too holy, that's probably wrong. Because the nature of the holy is that it keeps wanting to come close. The holy keeps wanting to be... Tell me what you can learn about the nature of God when he says, okay, this is how holy I am. I want you to gnaw on my flesh and drink my blood. Wouldn't you think that's way too holy to come near the body and blood of the incarnate God? He says, that's exactly what I want you to do. I want you to take it into you, right? I don't want the holy to be far away, because when the holy comes, it's going to make you holy. The more holy you get on you, the more holy you get. Which is pretty cool. Yeah? God is constantly saying, you want to keep me far away up on a pedestal, and that's not where I want to be. I am God with you. That's the word Emmanuel that we use. God wants to be right there with us. All right, but later in the verse we get just the opposite problem. So, one day the angels came to present themselves before Yahweh, and who came with them? Satan. Except it's not Satan. It's the Satan. There is what we call a definite article in front of it. It's the same thing that in English we call the, right? In English we have 3, are there grammar people in here? We have 3 articles. What are the 3 articles we have in English?
Well, I'm just stuck right
Oh.
here because mine doesn't have the.
None of yours will have the. And they all have the for Yahweh, right? Your translations are all screwed up.
A-N and the.
Hey, yes, Linda is correct. In English, we have 3 articles, a, an, and the. A and an are what we call indefinite articles, which means this is a envelope, it's not the envelope, right? What would be a the here? I'm the pastor at Spirit of Christ. There is no other. I mean, there will be someday, but right now, there is no other. It's a the. In the text, it's the Satan, ha-Satan. And that's because Satan is not a name. It's a title. And the title is referring either to an accuser or an adversary. It's a courtroom image. The Satan is the one who comes to press charges against the guilty ones. I have a friend in New York who's a DA, and that's what he does. He says, am I going to settle this case or am I going to prosecute this case? And the Satan is presented here as the cosmic prosecuting attorney. The text doesn't talk about him as being evil. There will be other texts that we get to that introduce that idea. But Satan here is not presented in any way as being evil. In fact, he's the one who looks and says, where there's evil, I'm going to prosecute the case. And he says, God, what you're doing is being soft on crime. How many of you feel good about soft on crime? It's good when you're the criminal. All right? Yahweh says, look at my guy Job. He's righteous. And ha-Satan, the prosecuting attorney, says, man, he's righteous because you coddle him. You give him all the stuff. He couldn't have a cushier life. Of course he's going to be deferential to you and do what you want. You make life simple for him. If you were to make life tough, you'd see that the charges against him would start to stick too. Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
So I have a question.
Yep.
So why would they, okay, I'm not thinking of the word, translate it in as Satan when the minute I read Satan, I immediately think the devil.
Yes.
I immediately think so every time I'm seeing it. Obviously, this is the first time I've heard this.
Yes.
You know, I've heard this stuff about the Lord before, but never about the
Yep.
Satan. And so immediately I'm thinking, yeah, it's Satan. It's the one that's like always,
Yep.
but it's not. So why would they translate that? Why would they not translate it as?
Both because when we get to the New Testament, they'll stop using the definite article. They'll start speaking about it as if it's like a name instead. We do the same thing. I might say the president, right, which is a title, but eventually I might start calling him, but president says, you know, and there it becomes almost like an alternate name. Or pastor says. I mean, it's the same thing. You could call me the pastor, but if you just said pastor says, you're referring to me, and you just stop using the title.
So are you saying in the Old Testament Satan wasn't Satan? He was just the guy who was the DA?
I would say both, that he is the guy who's the DA. He's depicted as being at odds with Yahweh, but that's because Yahweh wants to be soft on crime. And we have a God who's, what would the term be if you got a judge who wants to let all the criminals go? Not necessarily corrupt, but soft. Yeah? Yeah, Yahweh's soft and Satan's against that. And that'll show up again in Zechariah 3. That anyway, yes. So we'll see that elsewhere. But by the time we get to the New Testament, it starts to take on a different flavor. Satan starts being talked about as having a kingdom that opposes God in a more powerful way. And is that because of us? Quite possibly. We could be the reason for the rebellion, but we don't know that for sure. That's speculation.
Isn't it less about God being soft on crime, meaning holding back punishment for wrongdoing, versus focusing too much on positive reinforcement?
Ooh.
So thus directing their behavior in a positive way.
Okay.
It's like training a dog.
Okay.
So Satan, to me, when I read this, he's accusing man of not being as good as what he's showing.
Yeah.
And the way to show the reality of that is by stopping
Yes,
your positive reinforcement and
Yep.
let things be.
that's right.
So I see it as less of you're allowing them to be evil and you're not punishing for it versus all you're doing is overcompensating
Yep.
to do good stuff.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's very fair in this case at least. Yeah. Yep.
So the Hebrew says it the right way.
The Satan. Yep. Yep. And the word has the name has a meaning to it, and the meaning is not as a title, or is not as a name but a title.
It's like fridge. Like,
Yeah.
We call them fridge.
Yeah, William Perry.
The
Yeah.
brand Frigidaire
Yes.
was refrigerator.
Yes.
But over time, we just now call it fridge.
Yes.
So
That's right.
it's similar, right?
Yes. Yep. Oh, I thought you meant number 72 for the Bears, but you meant the actual appliance.
He earned that name.
All right. So what's being depicted here is like a cosmic council or a cosmic courtroom. And to understand this fully, understand that we in the United States have courtrooms that are separate from the king. But in the ancient world, it's the king or the governor or the whatever who's doing most of the judging. You don't have a separate branch, right? That's something that we have what? I don't know if I want to say perfected in the United States, but we're used to thinking about executive and judicial as being different. In the ancient world, the king is the judge. And so here's prosecuting attorney coming before the king because Yahweh is presented as being the boss of all of the spiritual beings, all of the powers and principalities, as the New Testament will later talk about it. Yahweh says, did you see my guy Job? Satan says you're coddling him. God says, all right, you can't touch him, but take away his stuff. Now, another thing about the ancient world that is not the same as ours is that stuff includes stuff that we don't think of as stuff. Stuff includes your people, your kids, and your servants, and so on and so forth. And so the Satan is going to have free reign, and Job is going to lose all of his stuff, and Job is going to lose his kids. Job doesn't lose his wife, but that's in part because she's going to be part of the story coming forward. Okay? And still Job does not turn. He says, Yahweh gives, Yahweh takes away, blessed be Yahweh. He's saying, this is how it works sometimes, and I get it, and he'll give me more stuff down the road. He's given me stuff before. I got to take it. So Yahweh says, you see, and Satan says, I don't see anything. Let me at him, right? Let me really take a shot. Let me make the guy's life miserable, and we'll see what happens. And Yahweh says, all right, take a shot. And so Job starts to have a life that is absolutely miserable. When I get mosquito bites, I'll sometimes take my thumbnail and put a little X in it. It doesn't work that well. What does work well, if you guys don't know this, I'll introduce you. There's a sucker thing that you can get, and boy howdy, that's effective for all sorts of bites and stuff like that. If you're not familiar, stick around and I'll show you on Amazon where you can get one. They're cheap and they're crazy good. But I would put a little X in it to try to see if that would make the itching go away. Job will be in a place where he is so full of sores and such that he's taking shards of pottery and cutting them open to try to let the misery reduce a little bit. He's just in a dark, dark place. And his wife says to him, 4 words. You remember what they are? She says, curse God and die. What she means is cause and effect. What she means is the equivalent of put the gun in your mouth, pull the trigger, and die. Because what she's saying is when you curse God, he'll take you out. And then you can be done with this whole thing. Right? She's saying curse God as your means of bringing an end to all this. And Job says, Now, Job says, but as we get deeper into the poem, the tune's going to change as things go on and on. The book of Job is not a story of Job, no matter what happens to him, staying strong and faithful no matter what. He's going to end up getting ticked at God. He's going to end up saying, I don't buy all this stuff about God, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Job's friends are going to show up. And when Job's friends show up, they start by doing excellent ministry with him. They sit with him for 7 days and don't say a word. When someone is hurting or when someone is grieving, don't be afraid to just go sit there with them. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have the right thing to say. Sometimes just knowing that someone's there and caring about you is incredibly powerful ministry. Do not forget that. The problem often comes when people open their mouth, because then they've got ideas about things, and sometimes those ideas are not all that helpful. For example, when someone dies, don't say to their parent or their spouse, I guess God needed another angel up in heaven. Don't say to them that I guess God needed another angel up in heaven, because the scriptures don't talk about it that way, that God is bringing people because their time is up. It talks about death as being the enemy. And God will put a pause on when that happens. But people die because death. People die because death is a power, right? It is not God saying, all right, it's time for me to take you home. It's God saying, I'm going to stop stopping death from taking you at this point. And death's going to take us all. That's okay, because death took him and it didn't win, and it won't win with us either. But we don't get to speculate about God's, it's like the Katrina thing. We don't get to speculate about what God's up to. The scriptures are going to tell us that's not our purview. And this is where we get to two concepts that are really important. It's what we call the hidden God and the revealed God. Is the green too difficult to see? Is it too light to see well?
Almost.
Okay, then I'll use hidden and revealed. Now, both of these are God. There are plenty of times where God's doing stuff and you don't get to know whether God is doing it, let alone why God is doing it. And God doesn't want you to know whether God is doing it, let alone why God is doing it. And all our attempts to speculate are going to end up hitting a wall, because God says, I don't need you to help me do my job. And I don't need you to figure out how I'm doing my job. You be you, let me be me. And there are plenty of times, including the end of this book, where God is going to put a hard and fast stop to all of our attempts to talk about why God is doing what God is doing. On the other hand, God says, I do want you to know me. I do want you to know what I'm about and what my heart is about. And so I'm going to reveal myself. I'm going to show you things. I'm going to open up to you who I really am. But where we get in trouble is when we try to know the hidden God instead of knowing what God has revealed. When you're trying to figure out God, you're in deeper trouble than you think you are. When you're listening to what God tells you about who God is and what God's up to, then you're in great shape. Whether you agree with that, can you hear and understand what I'm saying there about the difference? Okay? So Job's friends sit with him in silence for a while, and then Job starts complaining. He says, I wish I'd never been born. This is so miserable. And what he says is, if I had a trial in front of the cosmic judge, he'd say this is unfair too. And then Job's friends start responding. And you see them go in a cycle, because it's a song, right? Each one gets a verse before it goes back to Job's verse. And the friends are going to start to open up the triangle that is at the center of this book. There are 3 legs to the triangle, and you can have any 2 of them, but you can't have all 3. The first leg of the triangle is that Job is righteous. Now again, you as the reader have been filled in on the fact that that's true. God said so. Do you see my guy Job? He's righteous. We know as the reader that that's true. The second part is that God or Yahweh is righteous. And that may seem obvious to you, but what if God was a jerk? What if God said, it's Tuesday, so I'm going to cause misery, and then Wednesday's a good day for me, and I'll make it better. And boy, I like to see these little peons suffer. That's fun for me. What if God was a jerk? But Job's friends say, no, we know God's not a jerk. I don't believe God's a jerk either. Do you all believe God's a jerk? I don't believe that. The third leg is God rewards the righteous and punishes the unrighteous. And when Job says, I'm not getting a fair shake, this is where the friends come in and they say, look, man, we know God is righteous. And we know the way God works is that God rewards the righteous and punishes the unrighteous. By the time Job is written, the book of Proverbs has not been written yet, but there's a whole lot of thought that this is how God works. It's like karma. Yeah? You do good and good stuff's going to happen to you. You do bad and bad stuff's going to happen to you. And there's a general expectation that that's how God's going to work. And so the friends say, we know God's righteous. And we know that God rewards the righteous and punishes the unrighteous. So there's only one answer left available. You, Job, aren't righteous. We don't know what you're hiding. They make some speculations about what they think that he might have done that he's not owning up to. But they say you can make all this go away because God's not only righteous, but He's pretty merciful. And if you just name the mess that you've made that you won't acknowledge before anybody, maybe this can come to its close. Job says, as a response, I know I'm righteous. Now, that may seem funny to you, but God confirmed that was true in chapter 1, right? That's what the author's doing when he's setting you up in this frame story. He wants to give you the certainty that when you're hearing Job say, I'm righteous, that he's right. And so Job says one of these other things might not be true. And he speculates maybe God is a jerk. Maybe he's what we might call capricious, right? He does things one day for one reason and does things another day for another reason. And
Can we back up just
yeah, please.
why? I'm still kind of confused about the names of Satan and God and Lord and all that.
Oh, okay.
But why would God make this kind of bargain or conspiracy almost with Satan to do this, to allow him to do that to Job?
Guess what you've just done? You've stuck your head in the clouds to find the hidden God, to say, why is God doing what God's doing? And the whole point of the book is that's a bad idea. Now, I'm just making the point. I totally get why you'd ask that. Of course you'd ask that. And of course we ask that every time something crappy happens. Why would God let this happen? Why would God unfold it this way? How many of you know people who are total garbage, but they make a lot of money and they have a lot of power and they have a lot of success and things seem to go well for them? And how many of you know people who are salt of the earth, really awesome people, and the hits just keep on coming in their life? The misery comes again and again and again. And you start saying, why would God do this? And the book is setting you up because you will keep asking that question. And it's setting you up to come to the conclusion, ultimately, that question is always going to frustrate us. That question is always going to leave us empty. It's a perfectly sensible question that you're asking, and the whole point of the book is that it doesn't work to ask that question. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not dismissing your answer. I'm telling you the book is dismissing that as a question.
So it's interesting because, first of all, it was beautiful that you asked that question. It's literally the point of the whole book.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people misinterpret that. They do focus so much on the whys, but when it comes down to this, just like everything that Jesus ties into in the New Testament, it's all about trust. Because you can't ask why, you could never understand the why. You weren't there when the foundations of the earth were laid. You're asked to trust. So I love this book so much because it gives a whole new, deeper meaning to what does it mean to trust God.
Now, sometimes, especially when we look backwards, we can start to see what St. Paul means when he says, God works all things for the good. We can start to say, 20 years ago that happened, and I can see how stuff came out of that I never would have imagined that was pretty amazing. But not always. Sometimes we go our whole life and we never get that answer, but you're exactly right. And this gets to, I don't know if we talked about this last week or not, but I think we did. Did we talk about what faith is?
Yes.
Okay, so faith, remember, is not a matter of knowing the right things. It's a trust relationship. And so it is a relationship with this God who's doing God's thing, and I don't get it, but I'm going to trust ultimately that this God, and this is where we're heading with God revealed, that this God is truly for me, on my side. And when I start to trust that God is with me and for me, then when the stuff happens where I say, what kind of God is this? I can say, I don't have to get it. I know that He's for me. And that's ultimately where we're heading. But we're not there yet. Excellent question, even though it's not. I mean, Jason's right. It's just the right question for right now so that we can start to see that it's not the right question. That's the whole point. Go ahead. Oh, you weren't going to raise your hand. All right. So, Job says, maybe God's not righteous at all. And Job says, wait a second. I see the thing we were just talking about a few minutes ago. I know some people who don't deserve good stuff and they're getting good stuff. And I know some people who don't experience bad stuff and they don't deserve it. And within this poem, it is a reflection on our human experience as we're trying to figure out God, and it doesn't feel like God plays by the rules the right way all the time. Now, eventually, again, we're not going to go thoroughly into the book of Job here because I want to get to our answer. Eventually, God shows up. And you would expect God to say, listen, man, I know things have been hard for you right now. This has been a rough go. But you have to understand, I had this thing going on with the prosecuting attorney, and the test had to show him what I know to be true about you, and it's all going to be okay in the long run. I appreciated that even though you were struggling, you trusted me a little bit. That's not what God says. What does God say?
What do you know about it?
What do you know about how to be God? You've got no business telling me how to be God. Not only do you not know the mechanics of it, right? You don't know how everything got put together in the first place. You don't know how everything's designed and how it all fits together, right? It would be like me. This isn't a perfect analogy, but Jerry understands mechanical things and I don't understand mechanical things. If I were to go to a Mercedes and tell him, Jerry, you put the engine on that Mercedes together the wrong way. What you should have done here is that doohickey should go on this thing over here. Jerry would look at me like I'm an idiot because he's spent hours and hours and hours and hours fixing that thing. And I've got no idea what I'm talking about. And God says to Job, you're in no position to tell me what to do here.
But the depth of the things that God is telling Job just boggles the imagination.
Yeah.
It just,
because
I know about war horses.
The world, animal and human life, the universe, it's an amazingly complex place. We've gotten into a place in 2025 where we can finally say the world's an amazingly complex place. The universe is an amazingly complex place. It's the truth that the more you know you don't know. There continue to be mysteries that we can't fathom, and God speaking to Job and saying you don't get it is as true now as it was then. But he says not only do you not get the mechanics, But if I let you be in charge of judgment for a little while, I wonder how you'd do. I wonder how it would go if you were the one who was deciding who gets what. And so ultimately here, what God does in the book is to put the brakes on every attempt to know the hidden God. We're talking about theology here, the study of God. And I start here with Job so that we see that Scripture is telling you very clearly it'll never be you figuring out God. That's the way you study God. And we're going to see as we get into 1 Corinthians even more about that. Go ahead.
Well, I heard an interesting analogy where a auto mechanic goes to a surgeon and says, look, you and I are exactly alike. I can change the valves, I can do the hydraulic, circulatory system, I can do all this stuff. You know, why don't I get paid what you get paid? And the surgeon says, can you do it while it's running?
Yeah, right. Nice. I like it. Yeah.
So it's kind of...
Yeah.
Good.
This is not quite the same thing, but by the way, I'll take a picture of it and show you guys at some point. But when I go to the animal groomer, they ask why the animal groomer charges so much more than the haircut, and it's the same sort of thing because you don't try to bite your barber and you know all those sort of bits. It's really great. But yeah, there's something far more complex about what God is up to. Yet we think, and this goes back to I say go back, but we're not there yet in this class. It goes forward to the time when we're going to see human beings say, I'll be God and I'll be in charge. Right? And this is God saying, you've got no business. So the whole book is setting you up to see that you're never going to be able to figure God out. And the whole point of them telling you on the front end, this thing is true, is that it's going to leave you stuck in the mystery of this, and ultimately we're going to have to move to the trust you were talking about. Now, that's God hidden. Now let's go to 1 Corinthians. By the way, don't be afraid to use the table of contents in your Bible if you don't know where a book is. It's really okay. That's what it's there for. Don't be embarrassed if you don't know where all the books are. Do any of you have... I'm going to look at Nancy because... Oh, no, I thought maybe you had all the books tab. Do any of you have... Oh.
I do, she does.
Okay, so consider doing something like this that shows the book. Oh, yeah, okay. You might be able to see she's got all of these little tabs that tell you where a book is, and that's pretty helpful as you're getting to know it. But don't be afraid of the table of contents either if you have to find a book. So we're going in the New Testament to 1 Corinthians. Now, Job... Chapters 3 through 41 are probably the oldest thing in the Bible. And it comes out of an oral tradition that someone has put into a poetic form. The Bible is not making the claim that if you had a dictaphone, you would have recorded word for word what's going on in the book of Job. That's not what's going on there at all. Someone has taken the dialogue and made a poem out of it. It's the same thing that happens when William Shakespeare does the Henrys or Julius Caesar. Shakespeare was not claiming that if you had a video camera, you would have heard this dialogue. He's making up dialogue based on the story. And the Holy Spirit's doing the same thing here in the book of Job, taking a story that everyone would have been familiar with and putting it into a poetic form for the sake of communicating what God is up to here. Moving ahead to 1 Corinthians, now we're going to the 1st century AD, the 1st century, probably about 20 years after Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension. And there's a guy named Paul who has been bringing God's message out to various cities in the Greco-Roman world. One of them is the city of Corinth. And here he's writing a letter to the people of Corinth. And he's going to talk to them about what God has done in Jesus. So moving to 1 Corinthians 1. And we're going to start at verse 18. But first, I'm going to give you a handout. I would tell you to read this, but you probably can't. I can't. So, you may. I will give John one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We just need one.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was gonna say, how old was Eli when you wrote?
So, what you are looking at there is the oldest piece of Christian art that exists. And it's not made by a Christian. It's made by someone who's making fun of Christians. Do you see that there is a cross in the picture? Do you see what's on the cross?
Like a donkey.
It looks like a donkey because it's a donkey. It's a guy with a donkey head. And the inscription next to it says, Alex worships his God. Do you see the guy to the left of the cross? That's a worshiper of Jesus. Why does Jesus have a donkey head? Because he's an ass of a God, is what's being said. Because what kind of pathetic ass of a God can't avoid the most shameful, humiliating, painful public execution? How pathetic is your God if he's going to let that happen to him? I sometimes will reference President Trump when he was in his first campaign talking about John McCain, and he talks about John McCain as a POW, and he says, I like the guys who didn't get caught. That's the way the Greeks would have thought about their gods. We don't want a God who got caught and executed. We want the one who was tough enough to be able to stop the executioners. And so you're pathetic for worshiping this God who couldn't stop himself from getting killed. Remember, this is an honor and shame culture. And there is no greater shame than crucifixion. You have been stripped naked and put on display as you're being publicly executed, shamed in front of everyone. They're pointing to you and saying, you never want this to happen to you. Right? This is now the lowest of the low. And not only that, but the suffering that would be connected to crucifixion is immense. If you're not aware of it, what happens is, after you've been hanging up there for a long enough time, your rib cage will start to separate from the rest of your body and you'll asphyxiate to death. Have any of you been in a place where you couldn't breathe before? That's how death finally happens. You're going to try to push yourself up, but you've got a nail through your feet, so it makes it excruciatingly painful for you to push yourself up to breathe. Eventually, slowly, you'll stop being able to breathe. The misery is unthinkable. And this is the God you worship? Now, a couple things. Any of you wearing a cross right now? Yes. So, what would you imagine if you saw someone with a little electric chair around their neck? Right? Do we want to celebrate people who went to the electric chair? And that's what's happening when you're celebrating the cross. You're saying, I like criminals. Now, we don't see it that way because we're so used to it becoming art. In the first century, you are saying, I'm with the criminals. And that's not good for a society when you've got people who are, I mean, it's like the Manson family. I remember growing up that there were people who were still actually interested in Charlie Manson and like heroizing him for what he did. And that's kind of disgusting, right? The Christians were seen as being aligned with someone who got publicly executed. He's not going to get publicly executed if he didn't deserve it. Of course, we're not on their side. We're not on the side of the criminals. You follow what I'm saying? And if you're making the claim that your God got publicly executed, what does that say about you? So now, 1 Corinthians 1, starting at 18. For the message of the cross is, my translation here is foolishness. Do any of you have different translations? Folly.
Mine says, lest the cross of Christ should be made of no effect.
Earlier, verse 18, earlier on. For the message of the cross is?
Foolishness.
Foolishness, okay? Any others? Okay. One of the translations on Sunday night said absurdity, and that's pretty good. The Greek word is moros, from which we get the word moron. The message of the cross is moronic. And we must, as Christians, embrace this. The story that we tell about how God rescued the world is a stupid story. The text says so. God intentionally does this. He intentionally chooses something that makes absolutely no sense. And Paul's going to tell us why. The message of the cross is moronic to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. Now note that he doesn't say that the cross is the power of God. What does he say is the power of God? The message of the cross. The claim the scriptures are making is that somehow as we tell the story about how God came in Christ to rescue the world in this way, that's the power of God to save people. That actually sharing that word, sharing that message is revealing who God really is in a way that actually rescues people, in a way that actually pulls them out of the powers that are holding on to them. This is a really important thing to grasp. We celebrate word and sacrament ministry in this place because we believe that's the power of God. That in the proclamation of the story, God is actually doing something powerful to and for us. So, for those who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, and you notice there's a little poem here, right? You can see that verse 19 is a little song that they've from Isaiah that they've inserted here. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. So here's the claim Paul's making, and he's going to keep making it as the chapter goes on. God has intentionally gotten in the way of knowing God with our brains. God has intentionally gotten in the way of knowing God either through wisdom or science, knowing God through investigation or intuition. There are people who will say, I can just feel God. God says, no, you can't. I'm going to stop you from that. I'm going to stop you from braining your way to me. I'm going to stop you from hearting your way to me. I'm going to stop you from you anythinging your way to me. He says God has intentionally put the brakes on any human effort to know him because he wants to be known in a particular way. And he says, you're never going to brain your way to what I had in mind. You're going to think it's crazy. Right? So drink this deep. God has said, any way that you want to know me that isn't this, the suffering God who's come alongside humanity to enter into the worst of what it can do to him and to be there among those who are sinners, right? Because when Jesus is crucified, there are two people with him. Who are they? Criminals. Right? When he's baptized, he's baptized with a bunch of people who are being baptized for repentance. People who are saying, my life's a mess, I needed to turn around. Jesus says, yeah, me too. And he goes and gets baptized with them. In the crucifixion, we've got people who are experiencing capital punishment. God says, I'll be with them too. That's a crazy story. And Paul says, God has intentionally put the brakes on us knowing him any way but that way. Because we'll never come up with who he really is. I had a friend in high school who says, I can know God because I look out at the beauty of creation and the way things work, and I know that there's something out there. And that may be true, but you'll never know who that God is through science. You'll never know who that God is through philosophy. You'll never know who that God is from all of your studying, because God says, I will stop you. Because I want to be known this way. And what we'll hear as the New Testament unpacks it is that the way he's being shown is what we call agape. It is self-sacrificial love. God says, you can know me in a lot of ways, but you'll only be seeing a little bit. the way I really want you to know me, is a self-sacrificial love for you that's going to bring rescue at the cost of me, at the cost of me giving up me. And this has enormous implications. We'll do more in 1 Corinthians, but I want to jump right to what Paul says in Romans about the implications this has. Because when you get the cancer, is that God coming after you? And Paul says in Romans 5, you get to do it a very different way. Tell me if you've heard these words before. We also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope, and hope does not disappoint. So understand what's behind this. Your instinct is to say, the cancer must mean God's after me. But if you know God through the cross, through God's commitment to be for you and with you, even at the cost of Him, especially at the cost of Him, then you know that God's not against you. And if you know that God's not against you, then instead of the cancer being God's cosmic spanking, you say, okay, I'm going to suffer here, but I know that through this, I'm going to end up experiencing something about my life with God that's going to allow me to continue to stand strong in who He is for me. That's perseverance. And as you're standing strong in who He is for you, then you start to change. I'm going to be different because I know God is on my side, and I know this isn't God coming after me. I know that He's called me precious and He's called me His child. That's your character changing. And as your character starts changing, he says, that's going to produce hope. That God loves me so much, this much, that He won't leave things like this. That He'll bring me out of my suffering into a resurrection life where everything's okay. That He's going to fix everything. I make all things new. And Paul says hope doesn't disappoint. This is precisely what he's doing there. He's saying when you get that you can't stick your head in the clouds to know God through your own brain, then when the crap starts to come and you start with the revealing of God that says, I'm with you in the crap, then it starts to change the way you do everything, and God's going to use that to shape you powerfully. And so we as Christians start with the cross and the word that says no matter what is happening to you, God is on your side. God is for you. He will never leave you or forsake you. There is nothing you can be experiencing that is God saying, I'm done with you. You've walked too far. I've turned my back on you, because God turned His back on Jesus instead to show us who He really is. This is incredible. And I hope that you can grasp what God has done by playing. You heard playing the long game before? It's like a long con. He's started us off with this stuff in Job that has us thinking, man, what a weird God this is that He won't let us know who He is. And then He gets to Jesus and says, now I'm going to show you clearly who I am. And it takes the genius of Paul with the Holy Spirit directing him to start putting the dots together to say, what he just did changes everything. Because now in all the places we can't see the hidden God, He drives us to God revealed in Jesus. And we can have comfort. And we can have peace, even when stuff is robbing our peace, even when stuff is robbing our comfort. All we do is say, I know Him here, and nothing else matters, because everything else is going to be my brain lying to me, or the world lying to me, or my heart lying to me. He's for me no matter what. I'm going to pause and take a breath. How y'all doing?
Who can be against us? I love that.
That's exactly it. It's exactly it. That's exactly what he's doing in Romans 8:2. It's exactly right. He's saying, if this is how He's been revealed, then everything else we experience is not threat to us. And what if, you're going to hear, you heard a little of this on Sunday, but I'm coming after it even more hardcore on Sunday. What if we really live in all of the places where we say, well, the world's falling apart and look how awful all this all. What if we really live as if we say, hey, that's my reality. That's God as He's showing up in the world, no matter how much of a mess the world is. And then we become God's agents to point at Him in every circumstance, instead of being those who get caught up in all the yuck. And I'll jump into sermon mode here ahead of time. I see a lot of people getting caught up in the yuck. They get caught up in the fear and caught up in the anger and caught up in the whatever. And He says, hey, this is me. This is me for you. This is me for them. This is me for the world and the entire creation. And if you know me this way, settle down. I got this. The good news is good news. All right, let's get back to 1 Corinthians. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Paul is saying God is actively stopping us from knowing Him any way but the cross. Where is the wise man, verse 20? Where is the scholar? Where is the philosopher of this age? Hasn't God made moronic the wisdom of the world? Think about the implications of that. Think about the smartest and wisest people the world has ever produced. And God says, I'm going to undercut them by not letting them know reality through all of the gifts they have. They don't get to know what I'm really about by being smart. They don't get to know in all of the science, in all of the philosophy, in all of the wisdom. And in Greek culture, wisdom is a huge deal. People would gather in every city to debate and throw ideas back and forth. And Paul's saying, I see this all over. You guys don't realize God has put the brakes on you really finding what's true. Because He wanted to show you what's true in a story that's going to look stupid to you. But that's the real truth. And that's what God's all about. So, hasn't God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since, I'm going to take this slow because I want you to hear clearly what he's saying. For since, in the wisdom of God, can we all agree that God really is deep down wise and wiser than we are, right? So the way God's wisdom is going to show up, Paul says, is that the world through its wisdom did not know Him. The way God's wisdom is manifest is by stopping people from being wise enough to know Him. Because you would never come up with this. It doesn't make any sense. And without this, we don't know who He really is. We don't know the kind of self-sacrificial love that knows no bounds and defines His relationship with us no matter what. We would never come up with that with our brains. Right? So God has put the brakes on us knowing Him anyway but that. Since through the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know Him. God was pleased through the moronicness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand miraculous signs. We see that in the ministry of Jesus. They keep coming to Him, what sign will you show us that you have the authority to do these things? Right? God says you'll know the prophets because they're going to have signs, and so the people are looking for signs. And Jesus says, you keep looking for signs, but the signs aren't showing you anything, right? You want me to get you more bread, but you're missing that I'm the bread. You're missing that I'm the gift. You're looking for signs. I'm the thing that they've been pointing to. You've had signs for millennia, and they've been pointing to me, and now I'm here, and you're missing it. So, Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom, sophos. You know the word sophos even if you don't know it. You know sophomore? So sophomore is sophos, wisdom, and moros, moron. A sophomore is a wise moron. They're not a freshman anymore because they're just morons. And juniors and seniors are the upperclassmen who have more of the wisdom. Sophomores are kind of in that in-between stage where they're the wise morons. Anyway, the Greeks are looking for wisdom. But we don't bring wisdom. We bring Christ crucified. We preach Christ crucified. And again, we turn the cross into something pretty, and when we do, we miss the yuck of it. But it's in the yuck of it that we're making the real proclamation about who God is. Because God is saying, the yuck is exactly where I show up. Luther says it beautifully. The word he uses, I don't know German very well, but Scheitze. It's the word for poop, defecation. Am I saying it right? Scheitze? He says, we know God where God is scheitzing Himself. when he's a baby in the cradle, right? When he's too small and powerless to be able to do anything and is in the hands of others who have to take care of him. And when he's on the cross, because when you die, you're defecating yourself, right? Luther says, we know God when God intentionally shows up in the weakness. It's not an accident, saints of God, that at the end of our lives, we all become weak and helpless again. We start off weak and helpless. We mostly end up weak and helpless. We are being brought back to a deep reality that that's where God is. God has chosen to be with us in the weakness and the helplessness. When Jesus tells what we call the Beatitudes, blessed are the, blessed are the, blessed are the, all the Beatitudes are Him saying, life's better when it sucks because that's when you're dependent on God. And when you've got things together, you're going to be less dependent on God. You're going to be dependent on you. That's not blessing. I mean, this is a simple idea, and we miss it. Success is the opposite of where God shows up. And yet, we want to win. And so watch out, especially as Christians, when Christians want to win. When they want success, when they want recognition, when they want respect, when they want power, they're almost certainly wrong. Because that's not what we're about. We're about failure. That's how God wins. All right. Jews demand miraculous signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. Now, I didn't do this with the other group, and I need to, but let's talk about why it's a stumbling block to Jews. Turn to Deuteronomy 21, verses 22 and 23. It's easy to remember because it's 21, 22, 23. But Deuteronomy chapter 21, it's the 5th book of the Bible, so you're going all the way back. Verses 22 and 23. Chapter 21. Chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. Now, I'd like to invite you. Can you imagine being a non-Christian college student who's hearing this stuff for the first time?
Not really.
I was going to ask you about that.
How did they respond?
They don't know what to make of it. They don't know what to make of it. And all I can do is just keep repeating it every week. So, Holy Spirit, do your thing.
They don't have ears to hear.
That's right. That's right. And we trust that for those who are being saved, it is the power of God. We trust that somehow, for some of them, in that message, He's giving them ears to hear. He's creating that faith and that trust that'll allow things to change. But all of this is so different. I mean, I hear that regularly from students. This is not what we've heard from other people about what Christianity is, and it tells us that we haven't done a very good job being Christian a lot of the time. Anyway.
Well, the first part of what comes off the classes today, as a Christian, I was wondering where you were going, what this was about.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a hard time understanding how this was going to lead to what we're studying now.
Can you see how they fit together now?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
But it took, it took a while you were talking to kind of see where you were going. I mean, yeah. So
that's okay. And again, I understand the limitations of trying to explain all of this once and expecting that anyone's going to get it who hasn't had a background in it. But the hope is that at least it wets the whistle and the Lord keeps putting people in their life who will tell them the story.
Well, what's hard to understand about this part is that we haven't really heard the gospel or much of it.
Ooh, yeah.
So once it's like, he did what?
He did what is exactly the right question.
It's like, what in the world?
Yes.
And then the gospel comes later.
Let's do that now.
Okay.
Deuteronomy 21, verses 22 and 23. Would somebody read it, please?
If a man has committed a crime punishable by death, and he is put to death,
and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him the same day. The hangman is cursed by God, and you shall not defile your land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance.
Okay, I want to emphasize two letters that you said, but I want to make sure. The hanged man, not the hangman, right? It's not the person doing the hanging, it's the person who's hanged that's cursed by God. Good. All right, so what they're saying is this. He says, when you go into the land, you're going to have some people who do some gross and despicable stuff. Do we live in a place where people do some gross and despicable stuff? And we decide, with a jury of our peers, that capital punishment is the answer. They've got to end their life. He says, that's cool. And you can even put them on display for people to see, right? You can televise the lethal injection or the electric chair or whatever it is so that people get the idea about what you're doing here. But here's what's happening. If y'all make that decision, I'm standing with you and I'm going to put a curse on this because this is the opposite of what we're looking for, right? What that guy did, assuming it's a guy, is the opposite of what we're about in this place. They're under a curse. So you better get rid of the body because you don't want the curse to pass on to the land. Now, you might think that that's old kind of antiquated thinking. I don't think it is. Native Americans tend to think this way, and I think they're right about stuff. The scriptures talk about the idea that we're in sync with the land in some weird ways, but he's saying if you leave the body up, the land's coming under the curse too because of what's going on there. So think about the implications of this. Do you know anyone who experienced capital punishment and they hung the body up on a tree? And so what does the text say about him then? Anyone who's hanged like that is, and this is the gospel, that God said, curse me. I'm going to come and I'm going to be the cursed one. And in that, I'm going to remove the curse from everyone else. I'm going to join you in the curse that's been going on since Genesis 3. I'm going to take that curse as my own into me. And then you'll experience, when I get raised from the dead, being freed from the curse by being raised with me into a life that's without curse. You all have passed in the waters of baptism to the cursed life of the old, from the cursed life of the old nature into the uncursed life of the new nature, the blessed life of the new nature. Now someday, Jesus is going to make everything new and nothing's going to be touched by the curse. In the meantime, we still live in a world that's touched by the curse and we have bodies that are touched by the curse. And so the result of that is all of us are going to die because the curse is still kicking around. But God says because of what I did there, as you are depending on me, that's not who you are anymore. You're not cursed people, you're blessing people. You're people who are past the curse now, as you're pointing to what I've done to rescue you by becoming the curse for you. That's the gospel.
I think it's important, like that is an important thing to consider, because going back to Job again, that his friends and himself even are, because his friends have a point according to their point of view. Like, you are not righteous. There's no way you can be because the law, and including this, tells us that you can't be, and we wholeheartedly believe the law. So that in turn becomes their stumbling block.
I appreciate you redirecting me. Let's get to this piece at the end of Job. So God shows up after Job has been pointing the finger at God and saying, maybe you're not good and maybe you don't operate the right way. Right? Job has legitimately been saying those things throughout. And God says, I'm angry and I'm going to need a sacrifice. Who's he angry at?
The three friends.
You would think he'd be angry at Job because the friends have been defending God's reputation. They've been saying, we know God's good, we know he does justice the right way, so you must be the one at fault. And God instead says, I'm angry with the friends. Job, you were pointing the finger at me. You're righteous in that. But you need to offer a sacrifice for them. Because he says, when you're tearing down other people, that's where the real problem is. Think about how Jesus shows up in his ministry. He doesn't get into conflict with the tax collectors, doesn't get into conflict with the prostitutes, doesn't get into conflict with the sinners. He gets into conflict with the people who are going to point at others and say, you're not doing it well enough and you're aligned with evil. God says the problem is Job's friends who are going to take what's happening here and write something like this. So yes, what's happening in Job is God redirecting us to a very different way of thinking.
Who did write this?
Who wrote what?
This.
Show up in my office afterward. I'll give you the link.
There's a handful of them.
Yeah, that's right. You can. All I did was Google and hit the first link that I found. I mean, this was not intensive study because I knew it's out there, and you could find it with everything. Yeah, I mean, I'll bet you could go a week and find something that's the Charlie Kirk stuff. Somebody's going to be talking about how God's judgment is. I mean, it's all over. The junk is all over.
Here's the thing. Now I have to go home and I have to read Job all over again after this. Because I'm seeing it in a different way. Because I literally was like, I was listening to it, reading it at the same time, and then like, I don't even know what's happening here.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, oh, that's what was happening. I gotta go reread that.
So this is brilliant if you're reading through or if you're watching the videos. One of the videos is on Jewish meditation literature, and it makes just that point. It's not meant to be read once. It's meant to be read over and over and over, where you're getting a little more and something different each time. So that's awesome that that's what's happening. It may feel frustrating that you didn't get it the first time. God's designed it that way. He doesn't want you to get it the same way the second time and the third time. He wants
It's like when you're reading a book and you're like, who's Josephine?
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah.
Who's he talking to?
Yep.
Who's talking?
Yep. So I will say, when I read fiction, the same thing happens frequently for me. About my fourth or fifth time reading the book, things pop out to me that didn't before because I know the rest of the stuff around it. I'm not paying attention to all the other stuff because I know how that's going to turn out, so the details pop in a different way. That's how it works. It is not an accident that he has shown up in this format. All right, we have to do a little more before we finish up for the day. For the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. Think about what he's suggesting there. We believe God is wise, but God has intentionally chosen to do something moronic and weak, and says that's where you're going to see my true nature and my true power. Because God's superpower is not what we expect it to be. When you talk about God, you would think that the superpower is omnipotence, meaning he can do anything he wants. That sounds like a pretty good superpower, right? Instead, the superpower is self-sacrificial love. And he says, you're not going to look for that superpower because you're looking for the stuff that looks good to you. I'm telling you what the real world is. And the real world is not, according to the scripture, the world we see. It's deeper than that. So, now he's going to make the move, and then we'll finish up, to say, you can see in the church what God has chosen to do here. He says, look at you guys. You are not all the elites. You are not all the best and the brightest. You are not all those that everyone looks at and says, boy, these are the upper class folks. He says, God picks the losers, and I put myself among us, as the way in which he's going to show up, so that instead of us being celebrated, he's celebrated. There's a story in the book of Judges about a guy named Gideon. And Gideon is going to free some people who have been oppressed. And he puts some soldiers together. And God says a weird thing to him. God says, you've got way too many. He says, because if you go with that army and win, people are going to point to the army. And they're not going to say that I did it. So, he says, cut the forces way down to the point where they shouldn't be able to win the battle. And now, people are going to recognize what I did. It's the same thing with the church. We are special and we are blessed because God took a bunch of jerks and losers and says, when I win this way, they're going to point to me because it's my story. We hear that not only is the creation made by Jesus, but it's made for Him. It gets to be His story. Let's say, this is going to be a dumb analogy. I don't know that I can rescue this at all. But let's say that I wanted to give my son a birthday present. And the present I wanted to give my son would be a story that I wrote about him. I wanted to write a fictional story about him overcoming incredible odds to have a great success. And one of his friends comes in as I'm writing it and messes with my copy so that the friend is the one who's actually responsible for hitting the home run. And the friend is the one who's actually responsible for getting an A in the class, and my son just cheated. How does that work? This is God's kid. He gets the glory. We're not meant to get the glory. But then the beauty is, he says, watch what self-sacrificial love is when I draw you into His story and make you co-heroes too. Because I love you so much that it's going to be His story and your story together. But it's because of His love and mercy, not because we're so great. And that's what Paul's saying. What he's done here again and again is to take people who aren't the best and the brightest, and when he does remarkable things, he gets the glory. Oh, it's so cool. All right, we have more to do, but we'll start there at the beginning of next time. I really appreciate you all being here. If you have any questions, I'll stick around afterward. The Lord's peace to all of you. See you next week.
Thank you.